Welcome! Today, instead of discussing the future of spaceflight, I'll share a story from its past, which might have some implications for the future. In the last video, about the business streams for new space stations, the story of the so-called Cola Space Wars briefly came up, and when I was looking for information about it, there was surprisingly little content on it, other than some articles. It is quite a fascinating story, showing us how a rivalry between Pepsi and Coca Cola went to space on the shuttle, and it can give us a gist of what we might expect in advertising soon. One could say that the events discussed started in late 1984, when a Coca Cola representative met with a representative of the NASA Food Technology Lab. It was a tough time for Coca Cola. Pepsi was slowly taking their place and the company was looking for publicity. One of their other famous projects at the time, aiming to regain their advantage, was the new Coke, introduced in April of the next year, which became a complete disaster. But this meeting, one could argue, was to start a campaign of even bigger potential for the company. The Coke realized that previously there was no carbonated beverage in space, and they wanted to grab the title for the first soda in space for themselves. NASA explained to them why it is a hard thing to do. Since there is no normal convection in microgravity, the bubbles just don't escape the drink but stay in, which is not a good thing for the digestive system. They also expand, which means that soda can't be stored in the traditional bags the astronauts use for liquids. To that, Coca-Cola proposed that they will be the ones to develop the technology to send carbonated drinks to orbit for NASA, all of it at their own expense. But Coca-Cola will be the drink sent in the container. As you might know, NASA does not really work with other companies on advertising, but since for them this was more of an engineering development that they could use in the future, they agreed. Since NASA is a public agency, the project did not remain secret for long, as would be beneficial for Coke, and Pepsi soon knew that Coca-Cola is working with NASA, which of course wasn't to their liking. They couldn't just allow their competitor to accomplish such a feat without any struggle at least, and here is where politics started getting into play in that partnership. At the time, Pepsi associated itself with the Republican Party and President Reagan, who was then in office. They supported his political campaign, which resulted in them having substantial lobbying power. They approached NASA to send their own can of soda to space, making it clear that the offer is to be accepted, or else the agency will face trouble with the current administration. Although NASA did not really need two different soda cans, or rather dispensers, they agreed to the extra partnership. If they did not, it would seem like they show preference to one brand, which would be unacceptable. Coca-Cola though had a huge head start, and by this time they had already spent about $250,000 on the design. Their dispenser was tested on a zero-G airplane flight, and soon was certified for use in space. Pepsi struggled as their engineers had weeks instead of months to come up with the design and test the can of their own. The battle with time was on. In April of 1985, Coke was ready to fly. They were scheduled for the STS-51B Challenger mission on the 29th. The Pepsi did not get approved in time. Everything was looking great for Coca-Cola, until they received an unexpected phone call. NASA cancelled their flight last minute, offering the next available flight on the 12th of July aboard the STS-51F mission. The reasons for this decision remain mysterious, although there is no proof of that. Many think that Pepsi was actually the one who pulled the strings at NASA to halt Coca-Cola's project. No matter the reason, this decision meant that the race to orbit continued and Pepsi was not out of the game. Their can went through excessive testing in June and made the cut on the last available opportunity, meaning that it would share the same flight with Coke's can. Finally, on the 12th of July 1985, the Challenger shuttle was to lift from the Cape Canaveral in Florida. Both Pepsi and Coca-Cola had their booths in the visitor center, to remind everyone who came to watch the start that their products were also part of this mission. They put a lot of effort into trying to win over the favors of the observers to their respective side. Just before the liftoff, the emotions were on the rise, and there was an abort, caused by one of the fuel valves which failed. For the time being, the ads had to be halted, but soon, on the 29th of July, there was the next opportunity for launch. This time there was no abort and everything went as planned. Both Pepsi and Coke started airing tons of ads informing the population that their beverage is in space. But, surprisingly, there is little footage of the astronauts actually drinking the colas in space. Turns out they were specifically instructed not to have the cans in the frame for any broadcasts back to Earth, and only a few photos were taken that you can see in the background. This also was part of the brand neutrality that NASA was sticking to. Officially, those were just 2 tests of carbon beverage dispensing system, not ads. The Coke was tasted first as they were the first one to approach NASA, and Pepsi a few hours later. Of course, Coca Cola used that fact in the ads with the slogan, "The first soft drink enjoyed in space was a Coke." As there was little footage of the event, both companies really counted on the astronauts to give their verdict in the space taste test. At the news conference held after the shuttle came back to Earth, the media were obviously most interested in the cola wars rather than the actual experiments, which were the objective of the mission. The astronauts did not embrace any of the 2 drinks and in none of the questions asked showed any preference towards any drink, ending the war in a pretty unexciting draw. Later on, both companies tried to continue their space adventures with highly mixed results, and the campaigns were not as loud as this one. One of my favorite attempts is when Pepsi paid Russia so their cosmonauts would perform a spacewalk with a huge inflatable Pepsi can. In the end, this also wasn't a known campaign, as the company soon changed the design of the can to the signature blue one, and they decided not to air the footage with the old can. Overall, there were a lot of problems with those flights, coming from the fact that both companies had to work with national agencies, which wanted to be neutral and not risk any political trouble. Even today it is quite hard to find footage from the Cola Wars, and the only entry in the main NASA image library was this one with a description which swaps every mention of the brands with the phrase "popular soft drink manufacturers." But now it is not the 1980s anymore, and in the 21st century the space industry is undergoing a rapid, revolutionary privatization. There already are private spacecraft operational, and in a few years there will be more than one operational private space station. This will solve many of the problems that were so damaging in Coca-Cola's and Pepsi's campaigns. The private companies do not have to keep on the neutrality facade, which opens a variety of possibilities for in-space advertising. It is almost certain that sooner or later companies will realize that, and we will see such sponsored space projects again. If you are interested in space, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Leave a like if you enjoyed this short history. If you're interested in space stations, check out my last video where I go over how they will be making money. Have a great rest of your day and stay curious. Bye!